Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Education Writers Association's webinar on arts education. I'm Mary Plummer, and I'll be your moderator today. I am speaking to you from Pasadena, California, where I work at Southern California Public Radio. I'm one of our education reporters covering arts education. With us in today's webinar, I am very happy to introduce two panelists that we are so lucky to have with us today. We have James Catterall, who is an arts education researcher. He is the director of the Centers for Research on Creativity at UCLA. Hello, James.
Hello.
And then we also have Sandra Ruppert. She is the director of the Arts Education Partnership, which is a national coalition of organizations based in Washington, D.C. that works to ensure high-quality arts education for young people. Among many things, she led the design and development of artsedsearch.org, which we're going to go over in some more detail later. Basically, just a little bit about today's format. Both of our panelists are going to have short presentations, excuse me, and I'm going to ask a few questions of them to kick off the Q&A, and then we're going to turn to your questions. But just to start out here, let me go ahead and get to my slides. I have a couple things that I wanted to go over. So essentially, a little bit about what I do here. I cover arts education full-time. This spring, when this spring comes around, we'll have had the beat up and going for 2 years. It's a grant-funded position, and when I started, I really have to say the first thing I wondered is this going to be way too specific? What on earth am I going to cover? What can we do with this beat? But what I've found is looking at education from the lens of arts education has really opened up an entire world of stories that I don't think I would have found any other way. Arts education reporting, in my opinion, is filled with really interesting data stories and budget stories and equity stories. It's a beat that really showcases extraordinary successes, in my opinion. I'm thinking of some of the incredible, extremely successful art schools that I visited. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have very important stories about sort of, what I think of as art deserts. So places where kids who are legally guaranteed arts access just aren't getting it. So, over the course of the year and a half or so that I've been covering the beat, it's really an area that I've just come to love. It's just been an incredible wealth of stories, in my opinion. So I'm going to walk through a couple slides here that I think might be helpful, as you think about stories that you might cover in your own coverage areas. And I would love to touch base with people afterward who've already delved into arts education reporting and kind of brainstorm. I did launch the beat, so this has been a very kind of new area of focus for us. So it's been kind of trial and error, but a lot of fun stories along the way. So let's go ahead and get started here. So this first slide is just kind of a quick list of arts education reporting resources that I've put together here. This first study, and I'm not going to go through every link because we don't have a ton of time here, but the National Center for Educational Statistics, this is the 2012 report. I'd be happy to send these links to people after the webinar has completed. But essentially, this is kind of the go-to source for national arts ed numbers. It gives a really good national snapshot of arts ed access and how many students are getting what. The second link takes us to the New York City Comptroller's Office State of the Arts map. And I'm going to go ahead and just pull that up real quickly. Just so you can take a quick look. Data for arts education has been a real challenge in my reporting, and this is one of the really interesting things that came out. I believe it was last spring. And this gives you a sense of where all of the arts teachers are in New York City. So this is kind of a good frame of reference depending on what your coverage areas are and where you're looking at. But arts ed data has been a big challenge in my reporting. So when I come across things that are helpful and really in-depth, I try to kind of flag them for myself. Basically, this report found that in New York City, 28% of schools in the city lack a full-time certified arts teacher. And that actually is quite a bit better than the scene here in Los Angeles. This third link goes to arts education data from June of 2014 that Los Angeles Unified released. This took the school board well over a year to get this out there, so I just wanted to have the link handy in case anyone's interested. I can send that along to you. And then we've got a list of organizations that I've turned to for experts in the past: the National Guild for Community Arts Education, the Arts Education Partnership, which of course Sandra is joining us from there, Grant Makers in the Arts, Americans for the Arts, the National Association of Music Merchants Foundation, the National Arts Education Association. These are all kind of national groups that have good resources. And then moving along here, I did want to include a couple of our own reporting projects just because it is a new area of coverage, and I think some of this might be useful for other reporting projects going around the country. So to start with, we have the Arts Ed survey of school districts in Southern California, and I'll just pull this story up quickly. Essentially, this is a project that I did kind of when I started the beat, and it took many months to come together. But because there was so little arts ed data, I went ahead and did a survey of school districts in Southern California, and it was a pretty ambitious project. We developed the survey on our own, and then we sent it out. There were several hundred school districts I was getting to respond. Ultimately, I think we had 41 school districts get back to us. There's certainly things I would do differently if I did the project again. But still, with 41 districts, we got a lot of self-reported data that just no one had ever collected before. And the findings were pretty astonishing. You know, of the respondents, 24 said that they did not provide comprehensive arts access to the majority of their students. So essentially, you know, more than half of the school districts that responded were in violation of state law. And I think, you know, if you delve into arts education issues, you know, in your areas around the country, I wouldn't be surprised if you found similar things. The second link, I'll pull this up quickly, is sort of a similar data project that we did just looking at LA Unified. And we were able to parse together some of the data that was released at that the district had released with state data, kind of what we knew what was required at the state level. So if we pull up this map here, just takes a second. Basically what you're looking at is arts access at all of the elementary schools in Los Angeles Unified, and of course it's a huge district with about 650,000 students, so even the elementary level is pretty astonishing. But all of the blue dots are the schools that are in compliance with state law, and all of the red schools are schools that are in violation. And then if you go in and click on individual schools, you can see what exactly is offered. And as you'll see, you know, this school, for example, 3rd Street Elementary, they get 1 day of art per semester for dance, for example. So really what that is it's a sliver of kids getting 1 day for 1 semester. You know, you're probably talking about 45 minutes a week for 1 semester, and it's not all of the kids getting that. So in some ways, the picture of what's going on in LA Unified is even worse than what's represented just looking at the blue and red dots. Arts access for LA Unified has been a huge challenge, and that's something I've covered very closely. Moving along here, I threw in, and I can send this along, I'm not going to go into it now, but recently did a story looking at museum field trip data. There's been a huge decline in both Long Beach Unified and LA Unified in the number of field trips taking place, and that was just difficult data to kind of pull together. I thought that might be a good resource if people are doing similar projects. And then I just wanted to share a couple things that might be helpful as you're, you know, thinking about, you know, following arts education as a reporting topic. We have a Twitter list that we've compiled that follows a lot of great arts ed folks on Twitter. Always looking for others to add to that as well. And then we do have the landing page at our website, which compiles all of our arts ed coverage. I also do an email list periodically that just has kind of updates on things I'm following in education relating to the arts, and also kind of our own stories. And then a couple of hashtags that I found helpful on Twitter, hashtag ArtsEd, hashtag MusicEd, hashtag EdPolicy are all kind of good places to look for stories and ideas and conversations on Twitter. And then moving along here with the slides, this is a very brief overview, but some things that helped me when I started reporting on arts education in terms of where to look for stories. To start with, check to see if your district has an arts plan. Here in LA County, I believe it's something like 50 out of the 81 school districts do have an arts plan, but not all of them do. So that can be a place to start. It's not necessarily comprehensive. Comparing arts ed strategies at various districts, there's a lot of variation here in Southern California in terms of how districts are handling it, and the access and the quality can really vary greatly depending on what school district you're in, I've found. Look at how arts ed funding has changed over the years in your district. For Los Angeles Unified, essentially from the 07-08 school year, the arts ed budget has been slashed in half. And they've been trying to come back from that, but the implementation piece has been hard. It's been a lot of, talking about restoring it, but we've kind of yet to see that happen. And a lot of school districts, I know here in Southern California, after the recession, took huge hits to their arts ed budgets. Looking at public records requests, that's how I've done some of the reporting that I just walked you through, looking at the number of art teachers, looking at the number of art forms taught at each school. In California, the state education code requires that 1st through 12th graders have access to music, visual arts, theater, and dance, and many states have similar requirements. Find out if your district has an arts coordinator, and if they do, meet them. Some districts have staffs, branching, running an arts branch. Others may have one arts coordinator who's wearing many hats and who maybe spends 25% of their time working on arts issues. And then also really interesting areas kind of exploring the private funding versus arts ed funding provided directly by the district. I've run across schools and districts that just have an incredibly strong PTA presence and have been able to just get amazing things accomplished by doing that. But of course, then there's also the equity issue of that type of thing. So that's kind of a brief overview of some of that. I would love to now turn it over to Sandra Ruppert for her presentation.
Thank you, Mary. We here at the Arts Education Partnership, which includes, as our partner organizations, more than 100 national organizations from arts, education, philanthropy, business, culture, and government. We share an aspirational goal, I think, with the rest of the education community. We do believe that arts education is education, and as part of that goal, we believe that every student should leave high school ready for college, career, and citizenship. Part of the problem is that in framing that conversation around college and career readiness, the frame has been focused much on the controversy related to the Common Core state standards in math and English language arts, when in fact college and career readiness is more than those two subjects, and I think most people recognize that. So the time is right, I think, for us in the arts education community, and hopefully in the education community more broadly, to reframe that conversation around college and career readiness, to talk about every student needing a complete and competitive education, a well-balanced education, a comprehensive education that includes the arts as an essential component. Now, why the arts? Well, the arts prepare students for success in school, work, and life. Evidence-based research is mounting, and we have a lot of it, including, which you'll hear from Dr. Catterall later, that students deeply involved in the arts do better in school, they get better grades, they're more engaged in their own learning, they're less likely to drop out of high school, they're more likely to graduate with their class, go on to college, be satisfied in their jobs and their careers, and to take an active role in civic life. And the findings for that we see overwhelmingly are beneficial to students in high poverty schools, in particular students of low socioeconomic status. So in addition to the role of the arts in addressing the benefits of for academic learning, for cognitive learning, for personal and social involvement, the arts also help strengthen educators' supports and effectiveness. Teachers in both the arts and in other subjects need a repertoire of instructional strategies that they can use to reach all learners. And the arts are an incredibly important tool in that toolkit. Additionally, arts-based assessments are really important and powerful for looking at demonstrations of student learning, and performance-based assessment, two very important topics now as we think about the evaluation of teacher effectiveness. And additionally, the arts can help transform teaching and learning environments. The arts, along with a set of other tools, can help to transform some of our lowest performing schools. And probably better than any other area, they can contribute to a positive school climate and culture, which we know is absolutely critical for student success. Now, when I'm talking about the arts, I'm talking about the arts both as a standalone subject, but also arts integration, and I know there's been some confusion about what that term means. Here is a quick and easy definition about what arts integration means. It means that instruction that combines content and skills from the arts with that of other subjects to increase learning in both areas. So the arts are really more than learning to sing your ABCs in terms of arts integration. It really includes deep learning in the art form as well as in other subjects. Now, turning to the state policy environment, one would think with those incredible benefits of arts learning, there ought to be some policies that support it. And indeed there is. There is a robust set of state policies that support learning in and through the arts. You can see that 50 states, only one state, and I'm including Washington, D.C. as a state here for purposes of this information, but every state but one has adopted elementary and secondary art standards. And there are new voluntary national standards that really raise the bar on student expectations in the arts to help students acquire 21st century skills. And those new standards include the 4 traditional art forms: visual arts, dance, music, and theater, as well as a new area of media arts. Additionally, nearly every state has instructional requirements at elementary, middle, and high school. And about half of the states follow the federal government in terms of defining the arts as a core academic subject. Additionally, over half of the states have an arts requirement for high school graduation. So when I'm talking about these are policies that are actually found in state statute and code. They're not implied policies. These are policies that, in fact, have the weight of law. So given that we have a strong research base and we have a strong state policy environment, what is the status of arts education in America today? And that's probably one of the questions that we get asked most often at the Arts Education Partnership. This is again referencing the federal data that Mary referred to, and this is the best national data that we currently have. It's taken from the 2009-2010 school year, and it surveyed all elementary, middle, and high schools about access to and participation in the arts. Just looking at elementary schools alone, we see that millions of students in public elementary schools receive little or no arts instruction. 1.3 million receive no music instruction, nearly 4 million no visual art instruction, and literally tens of millions of students receive no formal instruction in dance or theater as part of their elementary school education. Now, who are these students who have little or no access to the arts? These students are the students that attend our high poverty schools. They are the students who are from low socioeconomic families. They are the students of color, students who are English language learners, and students with special needs. In fact, put simply, the students who need the arts the most, can benefit from the arts the most, have the least amount of access to it. And in fact, this lack of access to arts education is really a symptom of and a symbol of a larger opportunity gap in this country that affects our high poverty schools and that separate groups of students by where they live and where they go to school. So in order to really address the opportunity gap in the arts, we need to look at it in the context of a larger opportunity gap for our students more generally. So just to sum up, 5 research and policy findings. The arts are an essential part of a complete and competitive education. The arts prepare students for success, they support educators, and they transform learning environments. There is strong state education policy consensus about the value of arts education, yet millions of students have little or no access to arts learning opportunities. And much of that is because of what I would call a policy paradox, where you can have strong and robust state policies, but you can have weak or uneven implementation at the local level. And that's a place, I think, to look, because you can see a mixed picture there. In some high poverty schools, the arts are strong because the school leaders have found a way to address issues around money, around time, and around priorities and other interests. So it's a very mixed picture, and on any given day you can read about a robust arts program somewhere in the country and just as likely to read where the arts are disappearing from the curriculum. So a couple of resources for you to know about from which I drew my presentation. One is artsedsearch.org, and this is a website of the Arts Education Partnership. It took us about 3 years to develop it, but it is a repository of high-quality research that's been vetted by a national review committee on the benefits of learning in and through the arts. We have about 240 studies in there right now that don't overstate the case for the arts and don't understate it as well. The Arts Education Partnership is committed to making data, information, research, and policy analysis accessible and open and useful to non-arts audiences as well as to arts audiences. This is the landing page for Arts Ed Search, and I show this to you because you can search for outcomes by students, you can search for outcomes for educators, you can look at outcomes for the benefits of arts during the school day as well as for out of school time. And you can look by grade level, you can look by art form, and also address the policy implications, find the studies, and read a quick summary. It's a great tool if you want to get up to speed quickly on the research on the benefits of learning in and through the arts. Secondly, the state policy information that I shared came from another part of our website called ArtScan, and that's a 50-state clearinghouse of state arts education policies. These are policies that are drawn from the actual language in statute and administrative code. So you can see that language makes a difference here in terms of whether the arts must be offered or opposed to whether the arts should be taught. The language is important, and you can compare states with one another as well as run multiple reports. And third, we have a number of easy to use, easy to read, trifold bulletins that we produce, our signature publications. One is on what school leaders can do to increase arts education, and these are 10 to 15 tips that are low-cost or no-cost strategies, but they also give you insights into what makes up a quality arts education program throughout the curriculum. And then preparing students for the next America is what it says it is about the benefits of arts education and looks at those benefits in terms of school, work, and life. Again, very easily digestible and completely accurate talking points. And all of these are available at our website, and you can see it down there, aep-arts.org. So thank you, and I'll turn the screen back now to Mary.
Great. Thank you, Sandra Ruppert from the Arts Education Partnership. Now we will turn to James Catterall of UCLA, who's going to talk a little bit about his own research. James, I give you the baton.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Sandra, for the wonderful overview of the arts education policy scene and of a great deal of the research that has gone on in the last 15 years. I was asked to spend 5 or 7 minutes providing an introduction, and that's what I'm prepared to do, and to help to answer questions as I can along the way. I have a couple of stories that I'll tell as part of what I do. I've been a professor at UCLA now 33 years. I retired as an active professor 3.5 years ago to found a research center on creativity. And I'll say a few words about why I wanted to make that transition in a minute. About 15 years ago, I was working in a national database that had followed 25,000 kids from 8th grade through age 26. At that point, they had followed them through 8th grade and high school. And I noticed that there was information about art participation in this database. And I sat around with my friends at home and I said, you know, I'll bet if I look at that database, there's some really interesting things in it. And it turned out there were relationships between being in music, theater, art organizations, taking lessons outside of school, taking sustained work in art over time, and various things that Sandra inventoried very well in terms of where these kids, what happened between 8th grade and 12th grade. And what happened was they stayed in school longer, they did better, they got more involved in volunteering and so social and academic outcomes. And particularly for poor kids, because you know kids whose families have more resources are likely to get more involved in art. So you have to sort that out. I wrote it up in a paper and I took it to a conference on art and technology at IBM headquarters. This is now at least a dozen years ago. And you know, it's really stupid to take a paper to a conference because who's going to read it? Who's going to want to lug it home? And I showed it to a colleague and read through it and said, wow, look at this stuff. So she handed it to Sandra's predecessor at the Arts Education Partnership, Dick Deasy. And Dick read it. And the next day he came up to me and said, wow, there really wasn't any information like this about the arts. Numbers and art, number distribution, various things. It's hard to find in art education research, or at least it was back then. And Dick said, well, the head of the GE fund wants to talk to you about this. This is just 2 days into a 3-day conference. And the next day, as the conference was closing up, I went up to this person and said, hey, I'm supposed to talk with you. And she said, yes, I want to fund your work. And this doesn't happen in my world, but it did. And it led to a larger set of studies using that database. And ultimately, 10 years later, and now we're 4 years ago or so, to my production of a book called Doing Well and Doing Good by Doing Art. And it really ran through that database. The relationships held up. Schools with lots of art offerings and art activity, their kids did better than other schools. Art participation was good for kids with limited English skills. It just ran up and down the map. And so it became sort of a standard for what we know about certain benefits of art education. I didn't treat, are you a better artist? Are you a better musician? I didn't have data for that. But that's where things naturally led. Once you have these relationships in mind, then to me, and to many people there was interest in, well, how do you achieve good art education? What does it look like? What do visual art skills look like? Can you measure them in different places and that sort of thing? And so occupied myself with that. And again, I have a connection to the Arts Education Partnership and Sandra here. I was at a conference in Cambridge, Massachusetts, perhaps 4 years ago, and my book was just out. And yet, on the platforms, on the panels, on the podium, was a great deal of talk about creativity. And that echoed what seemed to be happening in the business world with political leaders. Everyone wanted to know about creativity and whether our workers in the future were going to be more creative, whether the U.S. would be more competitive if people were more creative generally. But all of those statements were not followed by suggestions about how we go about doing something about what some call the creativity gap or issues of creative development. And you know, my wheel started turning and said, this is something that seems like a real logical follow-up to what I've been doing and really important. And over 2 years of discussions with colleagues, I decided I was going to focus on creativity. And the best way I could do it, I felt, after being a professor for 30 years, was to turn my efforts entirely to studying creativity and to have some fun with it. And so I made the transition. I started an organization. We're almost 4 years old, and we've had lots of grants and contracts and a lot of interesting stuff. One of the first things that happened when I started becoming known for an interest in creativity was a call from an executive at the Disney Corporation, Walt Disney Company. And he said, James, I have an iPhone, and there's an app on it that says it can assess my creativity. What do you think of that? And I said, well, I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I have some guesses about it. And so I downloaded it and looked at it and brought a report back, a very brief report back to Disney saying, well, you know, it's very simplistic, doesn't tell you what to do with the data. It was based on questions from the Torrance test, very long-standing test of creativity. In fact, it was developed by one of the people who worked on Torrance 30 years ago. And this person said to me, well, Disney's launching half a dozen just this next year creativity-focused after-school programs, and we want to know if these kids are getting more creative. How can we do that? So we had, you know, a month or two of discussions on that, and realized there really wasn't much, or wasn't anything out there that really fit the bill. So Disney commissioned our center to develop a creativity assessment instrument. We work with their program leaders and others to do it. We've now used that assessment with 3,500 kids in about 15 different programs, including Disney's 6 programs, and it's working rather well. It does give you data or reports on creative interest, creative motivation, creative capacity. We build in measures related to motivation, including creative self-efficacy and, you know, how good students feel about their creative abilities. And and empathy, that's a good one. So we're using this in a lot of our work now, and feel it's taking an interesting and good solid place in the work around art and in the work around creativity. Let me just close this little introduction by saying, in our work with creativity, we do work with art programs. But we work with science programs, and we work with builders programs, makers programs with kids. We work with graphic design. Well, theater, of course, an art form. But we and most people consider creativity to be something that's involved in widespread human activity. And certainly, in anything you could call a thinking process, there is room for and a role for creative elements, and we see this across the board. And then there's 2 more comments in relation, in response to something Mary showed, and one was the graphic of Southern California. Now, I'm all for defending Southern California, but when you looked at all those dots and the few blue ones where the elementary schools were in compliance with state law, and all those red ones where the elementary schools are not in compliance with state law, you have to say so much for state law. States do require lots of things, or they legislate lots of things. California even has a law that says you can't legislate anything without funding it. And yet that law is defied. So there's an important role for state policy, but one has to take things that pass for and happen in state policy with a grain of salt. When you can come up with a map like that, and so in arts education, there's a lot of room for growth, a lot of room for improvement, a lot of room for more programming, and especially for kids who are low income. That's where you see low rates of offerings and participation. And California came through, like many states, a horrid budget situation. California's deficit at one point, 1 year deficit, was $19 billion. And that's more than the budget of probably 2/3 of American states. So when we do things in California, they're big. And when we make mistakes, they're big. And when we have problems, they're big. So I'm in a good place if I want to work on problems. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, James. I want to save plenty of time for our journalist questions. We're having questions rolling in now. I'm going to ask a question or two to kick it off, but if you do have questions, please enter them in the question box and we will get to those shortly. To start out, I just wanted to ask you both your thoughts on sort of, we've been talking about how arts education varies state to state. Can you talk a little bit about how implementation varies of arts education and what we're seeing in various states, kind of the variety of what's going on in terms of how we teach our kids about the arts?
Sandra?
Well, we do see a lot of variation across states in terms of implementation of state policy. I'd like to add a caveat to that oftentimes a measure of a state's commitment to arts education is not measured by the number of mandates that it has. Context is very important, and there are a number of local control states that don't have a lot of state policies in education generally and leave it up to districts and schools to make those decisions. So states like Colorado, for example, that is a local control state, doesn't have a lot of policies in statute and code, but yet approaches the arts very comprehensively and as part of a system that looks at all core subjects, including the arts, and not just the arts in isolation. So I think it's important to note that, and also the language of policy itself often gives districts and schools a lot of wiggle room for interpretation of that policy. Again, as I mentioned, language around shall be offered versus, students must participate. But then again, it is left often up to districts and schools, and you see a wide variety of implementation strategies. There are schools that look almost identical demographically, and one school can have a very rich arts program, and the other can have not much at all, if anything. And oftentimes that is because of the interests and what I would call the mindset of those school leaders. So I think looking at, we need to have the state policy environment because education is a state policy responsibility, a state responsibility, but clearly we need to also look at what districts and schools are doing and support those that have found a way to use their money appropriately, to identify what the priorities are and see the arts as part of the solution to the priorities of that school.
Great. James, I was curious if you talk to us a bit about, we hear so much, I think, in news coverage often, arts ed studies are covered quite a bit, and we hear a lot about how great arts ed is for kids. But for journalists, what are sort of the limits of the research as you see it? What should we watch out for as we're sort of vetting studies that come out? What are the limits of what we know about arts ed, and what's hard to prove?
That's a good one. Well, I think in many ways the big picture is covered when you look at kids who are involved intensively in art versus not, and look at that systematically, say within a state or across the country, that you get these absolutely positive relationships between doing more art and doing better as a student and as a citizen. I think when you look at individual disciplines, we don't know as much about that, about the same relationships between, say, visual arts, music, theater, and dance. One would expect that there would be differences across art disciplines in terms of their effects on kids. And while we pick some of that up in individual studies of individual disciplines, we're not real systematic about those differences. We have some ideas about it. We have ideas that visual art is about seeing and about thinking. I guess they're all about thinking when it comes down to it. Art is fundamentally a cognitive process plus whatever else goes on. Theater, it has, I think, suspected and demonstrated effects on empathy, how we understand each other, how we understand ourselves. It's hard to act a part in a company or in a show without giving some thought to those things and choices. I think, let me echo something or expand on something that Sandra said about implementation. I think implementation of art programs, we know some things about it. When we look at your charts with the red and blue dots, when we look at the data about how many kids are not receiving things versus are, and how many things are getting things in different disciplines, we know that implementation in terms of simply offering things is pretty varied, and it varies from district to district. It varies from state to state. It varies from school to school. And I guess most of the educators one talks to, teachers, school administrators, will say an awful lot rides on what the school principal provides in the way of leadership. And I think there are two kinds of school principals. There are those who think the environment and regulatory structure doesn't allow them to do much. And then there are the other type of school principals who says, damn all of that, I can do what I want. And that's the kind of school principal you want to watch for. And those are the kinds of school principals that tend, well, not always, but tend to bring in art if that's what they want to do. They figure out a way to do it. And that's important. But all that leads up to is more variation in terms of implementation. Okay, so I'll stop there.
Great. A question coming in from Sandra, some of the stuff that you went over earlier. Oops, I've lost the lights in the room. What is the one state without elementary and secondary arts requirements? You were mentioning your list earlier. Do you happen to know that off the top?
Yes, I do. And that is the state of Iowa. It has not adopted standards in any of the art forms presently. But there are a number of arts education advocates there that have been working hard with the state legislature and with the State Board of Education to include the arts and to adopt the new arts standards in particular. So Iowa right now is the only state that has not adopted elementary and secondary standards for the arts specifically.
Interesting.
But I'll bet that if you went across schools in Iowa, you would see a fair amount of art in general, and you would see a lot of art in some schools, which I guess speaks to sort of the motivation of educators, the resourcefulness of school leaders and school communities to do what they want to do, even in the absence of some state oversight and policy.
And do either of you have a sense, as we try to think about the national picture for this, of which states are sort of leading in the arts, of which states kind of have the best luck with actually implementing these strategies and getting arts ed to kids?
Well, one of the things that intrigues us here at the Arts Education Partnership as we're looking at the states and their policy environments are, where are there states that are adopting policies that are addressing some of the other issues in addition to the instructional requirement? For example, North Carolina is an example I like to point to. North Carolina has a very strong state superintendent for education. June Atkinson is a big supporter of the arts. But in addition, the legislature has adopted a policy that now for the University of North Carolina teacher preparation programs for elementary school teachers, the arts and arts integration are one of 4 areas that preparation programs must address. And in my view, that's an innovative policy because we know from surveys that have been done that many general teachers, classroom teachers, would like to use the arts as an instructional strategy, but they lack the confidence to do that. And rather than address it at the back end through professional development, a state like North Carolina is addressing it at the front end in their preparation programs for elementary school teachers. Additionally, the other thing that we look for is kind of a broad system of policies. So, for example, North Carolina and Minnesota, when you look at their policy environment, you see that in statute and code, the arts are considered a core academic subject. They've adopted standards for elementary and secondary education. They have instructional requirements for elementary, middle, and high school students, and they have a high school graduation requirement as well as a requirement for assessing student learning in the arts. Now, not all of those are implemented equally across the district, but it sends a strong message at the state level that the arts are, in fact, a core subject that's essential for college and career readiness.
Great, thank you. We've got a question coming in from Kara Newhouse. This one is for me. She asks, when you've looked at how arts ed funding has changed over the years, were you just focusing on the staff and school day program costs or including extracurriculars and other programs? This is a really interesting issue, actually. So for the blue and red dot reporting project that I showed, that was just school day arts access. Although we got a lot of feedback from listeners on that saying, my school offers more than this. We have these after-school programs. Did you count the after-school programs? That was something parents were very interested in. And my experience with that was, I think for parents, they don't necessarily, or for some parents, they don't necessarily, if their kid's getting arts, if it happens at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m., they're getting it. There's not so much a distinction between what time of day it happens. But if you go back to the California Ed Code, all students are required, it's their right to get arts education during the day. So we focused on what was happening during the school day. I have done reporting on after-school programs in separate stories. And what I found is that in many cases, at least in LA Unified, the after-school arts might be more than what they're getting during the school day. There's tons of schools in LA Unified that get nothing during the school day for many students, and those kids are only getting after-school arts access. But from my perspective, reporting on this issue, what you run into with that is you may not have credentialed art teachers teaching after school. You run into quality issues. So it's kind of a mixed bag and goes back to what James was saying about when things are being implemented in different ways, it's very hard to, kind of the quality issue becomes something to think about as you're thinking about what are kids actually getting. 45 minutes after school might be very different than, a sequential arts instruction that they would get during the school day. So some thoughts on that. Have you run into other thoughts on sort of after school versus during the school day, either of you?
I have a couple thoughts about it. One is I started saying a few years ago when arts education came up against resistance, time issues, priorities being given to reading programs, 2.5 hours a day for a third grader in certain reading programs, that the school schedule, it was insurmountable. It's uncontestable. And I started referring to the after-school time as contestable territory. So art programs could go in and actually find an hour a day on each of 2 days a week to do something. If you propose that you come into a school and do something new for an hour a day, twice a week, you'd get laughed out of the place because things are so packed and so stuffed that creating space for these kinds of things, except in very rare cases, is very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, in terms of this idea of, as journalists, sort of how do we hold administrators accountable, when there are requirements for arts ed, any ideas on sort of strategies of what to look at as journalists and how to kind of get at these issues when, these are things that are required in many cases by law but aren't necessarily happening during the school day? How do we think about approaching that?
I think, starting with the facts, finding out what is required, and then asking questions about what the arts offerings are. But that doesn't always address the issue of quality. You can provide access to a program that may not be of high quality. So I think there are additional things to look for. Is there some sort of a commitment or vision for that school that includes a well-rounded education, a balanced education that includes the arts? Are there arts specialist teachers who are credentialed to teach in that art form? Are they there, and are they serving as instructional leaders for the other teachers to help them address challenges that they may have in other subject areas in and through the arts as well? Is there professional development of a sustained manner that's being offered to all teachers that help the arts to be a part of the curriculum across the board? Is there joint planning time that's allowed? Is there some kind of a district curriculum that's being used? Is there sequential instruction that allows students to grow and develop in particular art forms? And is there some way of assessing and reporting to parents and the public what's being offered at that school? I think that sometimes parents assume that their children are getting a high quality arts education as part of their regular education, perhaps because they did when they went to school. And so it's important for journalists and for the public and parents to ask those questions and to gather the facts first. And then there's plenty of steps that can be taken to change the paradigm if that's needed at a particular school. It's not always successful, but certainly we believe that knowledge is power, and taking steps and asking good questions and following up are important.
I think we get battered by all kinds of imagery and some prominent imagery in education. Years ago, we were all criticizing the idea of education as, filling jugs, filling the minds of kids with information. And we got off that, in a way, by saying, no, it's about being able to think and that sort of thing. And although when people talk to me about education, whether it's on an airplane seat or tend not so much in conferences with educational sort of experts and educators, but that's still a very common conception. It's knowledge acquisition and storage. And so that's a problem, if that's what you think. Now we've got this wonderful, I'm being facetious, obviously, that this is all about college and career readiness. And That's interesting. I'm envisioning 10-year-olds going to school in suits and carrying briefcases, right? I mean, that's what that's about, and girls and boys. And so now I'm thinking about the counter to that is Samuel L. Jackson, who does the Capital One credit card, "What's in your wallet" commercials, addressing a group of 25 or 30 kids in seats in front of them with their briefcases. And so what does he say? "What's in your briefcase?" And half of them open their briefcase, and it's just a reader and pieces of paper and that sort of thing. And half of them open their briefcases. Why? It's got art supplies along with the academic stuff. And then you could follow that up with something like the kids with art supplies go on into the college and careers into creative jobs, and the ones without go into more routine jobs. I know exactly how to design that and orchestrate it, but it has something to do with what these kids have to work with right from the start. And if college and career readiness is what you're thinking about as a kindergarten parent, you need counseling. I'll just put it that way. And I don't like that image. It's a fine image if that's what you're concerned about ultimately, but it shouldn't be impacting what we're really doing with kids at an early level.
I'd just like to add one point to James's. That's a great image, James, and I actually, except for the briefcases, hope we have that kind of a dialogue. I think the other place where the arts really do play a special role is in creating a positive school climate and culture. That is so critical and something that's really lacking in a lot of our high poverty schools. When you walk into a school where there are no arts present or they're diminished of low quality, it really is a very sad place. And it's a strong comment on the health and well-being of our schools in this country. And I would suggest that the arts are in some ways the canary in the coal mine for our school health and wellness. And so we need to be particularly attuned to that and be receptive to the presence of the arts in changing our school climate and culture. And we've seen it again and again with turning around low-performing schools. Bringing in the arts and some other things can really have a tremendous impact on our school health and well-being.
Great. I want to be mindful of everybody's time here. We'll take one more question. This comes from Ian Gavigan. He asks, to any of the panelists' knowledge, have legal advocacy groups partnered with arts groups to successfully develop and push arts education policies?
Well, I guess successfully is the key word there, but it has happened. A group in Seattle sued the Seattle School Board or the state of Washington, I don't quite remember. The idea being states consider education a fundamental right, typically. They don't say what a right to what, they just say an education. And if you make the argument that the arts are fundamental to education, you can track that through due process and equal protection litigation. I haven't seen that frame work, and I know that's come up in other places, but it's never gotten very far. I'm not aware of a lawsuit around arts education that succeeded. I'm sure I'm missing something.
I'm not aware of any specific lawsuit, but again, this comes back to the point of looking at the lack of access to arts education as a symptom of a larger problem in terms of what we provide our students in terms of their opportunity to learn in our poor schools. So it's not just the arts in that case, and that lack of access to the opportunities and resources to learn are in fact an equity issue and a civil rights issue that should be addressed. So I think in that larger context, there probably have been some lawsuits that look at the legislation in its entirety in terms of equal access. But I know that there are many groups that spend time lobbying either at the state level or at the federal level to make sure that the arts are included in legislation and in fact implemented.
Yeah, I would say more than half the states, perhaps 2/3, have had significant lawsuits about equal funding and equity in funding of education. And so when those get sorted out, typically the lower funded schools get some more resources, or there are various formulas and ways of doing that. And when you get more resources, theoretically you can do more. And yet these lawsuits haven't resulted in, oh, and thou shalt do this with the extra money. No doubt someone has decided to, now we need to offer dance in 8th grade. And that's happened, thankfully. But it's not close to what you were saying about litigation around arts education specifically.
Great. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. This has been a real pleasure. It's my very first webinar, so thank you for dealing with us as we figure out the lighting and everything else. I also wanted to give a big thank you to Michael at the Education Writers Associations for inviting us all to do this today. It's been a really great conversation, and I learned a lot. Thank you to everyone who joined us from all around the country. Thank you to James Catterall. Thank you to Sandra Ruppert. It's really been my pleasure. This has been the Education Writers Association's webinar on arts education. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Thanks.